Hey guys, tonight we drift along the moonlit banks of the Nile, where papyrus reeds whisper in the breeze and the dark surface of the water reflects tiny pinpricks of starlight. You feel the cool air on your skin as if you've just stepped out of a dusty marketplace into this hushed corridor of ancient Egypt. You can almost hear the low creak of boats tied to the shore, the distant bray of a donkey, and the laughter of children sneaking one last handful of dates before bedtime. In this gentle quiet, the heavy scent of silt and wet earth mingles with faint smoke from clay ovens, reminding you that here food was more than survival. It was a daily dance of ritual, practicality, and sometimes just pure oddity. And don't get too comfortable. You probably wouldn't survive long here without your tetanus shot, given all the grit and questionable hygiene involved in cuisine. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is, because imagining the spread of sleepy listeners across the globe is half the fun. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wander deeper into this ancient landscape, noticing how the river truly is the heart of everything. Without the Nile's yearly floods, the land around would have remained barren desert, more suitable for lizards than for people building pyramids. That fertile black soil called Kimatoise, just farmland. It was life insurance. Every loaf of bread, every jug of beer, every onion, and every fig had its roots, literally, in that rhythmic flooding. You can imagine yourself standing there, barefoot, sinking slightly into the damp mud as you help sow barley seeds. They stick between your toes like sticky rice grains, and you mutter a half-sarcastic prayer that the harvest doesn't fail. Bread, beer, and onions became such iconic staples that even the humblest farmer relied on them like you rely on instant noodles or peanut butter. And yet, despite the simplicity, there's a sense of variety. Here are not just eating to survive. You're eating with ceremony, with gods in mind, with gossip to share and belly laughs to follow. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians were genuinely innovative foodies, or whether they just made do with what the river coughed up. But standing here in your mind's eye, it feels like a little bit of both. The air smells rich with life, fish drying in the sun, bread baking in communal ovens, garlic sizzling in clay pots. You catch a whiff of lotus flowers from the nearby marshes, their petals drifting across the current like natural potpourri. Even the buzzing mosquitoes add to the immersive soundtrack. You think to yourself that no fancy sleep app could ever match the layered noises of the Nile Valley: frogs croaking, crickets chirping, cattle lowing, and the soft hum of people singing as they wade through fields at dusk. And while you'd expect this society to obsess about gold and jewels because, well, pyramids and tombs tend to hog the spotlight, the truth is, their minds were often on the menu. What they'd eat tonight, what they'd trade tomorrow, which offering the gods demanded next week. If you zoom in on any snapshot of their lives, food slips into the frame. It isn't always glamorous. Sometimes it's moldy bread, stale beer, sometimes just onions, so pungent your breath could knock out a camel. But it mattered. As you stroll mentally down the riverbank, you can almost hear the hiss of catfish pulled from the water, the crunch of barley ground on stone corns, and the rhythmic chanting of farmers, syncing their muscles with song. You imagine brushing your hand along the stalks of wheat, the dry whisper of grain heads bowing toward you like tiny, golden servants. Every step here ties to the promise of nourishment. Without these grains and this floodplain, the great temples might have been nothing but sketches in sand. And because this is boring history for sleep, let's sprinkle in a quirky tidbit. Apparently, crocodile dung was once mixed into a kind of sunscreen paste. Picture that people smearing reptile poop on their arms, convinced it offered protection from the blazing Egyptian sun. Historians still argue whether this was genuine skincare or just one of those your uncle swears it works traditions. Either way, you can't help but smile at the thought of farmers baking bread with one hand while patting crocodile dung on their face with the other. So here you stand, drifting between the hush of the Nile and the bustle of its people. Your stomach grumbles sympathetically with theirs, though you're safe in your modern bed. Their world may seem distant, but food bridges the gap. A loaf of bread shared 4,000 years ago isn't so different from a midnight snack you sneak today, except maybe there's contained a few extra pebbles. You smile, a little drowsy already, letting the rhythm of this ancient environment settle you. You shuffle into a bustling courtyard where the air is thick with flour dust, smoke from clay ovens, and the constant sound of stone grinding against stone. Here, bread rules everything. Not just the bread you'd imagine today, fluffy and uniform, but dense loaves with rough crusts, so coarse that every bite risks chipping a tooth. You pick one up, still warm, and the aroma of barley and emmer wheat rises in a comforting cloud. It's hearty, filling, and if you're lucky, relatively free of grit. If you're not lucky, you're crunching on sand. And you will crunch, because even the best bread carried bits of ground stone from the corns used to mill the flour. Dentists today still shake their heads over the sheer number of ground-down teeth found in Egyptian mummies. You take a tentative nibble, pretending you don't notice the faint crunch of silica. It's not quite your modern sourdough starter vibe. Instead, it's survival in a loaf. The daily bread ration wasn't just food, it was currency. Workers received bread in payment, families offered bread to gods, and pharaohs had their tombs stocked with bread to munch on in the afterlife. You picture a royal ghost sitting cross-legged in a tomb, muttering, "Great, more bread," while nibbling into eternity. Historians still argue whether bread was genuinely beloved or simply tolerated because no one had a better option. But either way, it was central. The ovens themselves radiate heat like miniature suns. Women squat near them, shaping dough with swift hands, dust streaked across their faces like war paint. The loaves come in all shapes, cones, discs, even models shaped like animals for rituals. You reach toward one shaped like a duck, wondering whether it tastes better or just looks impressive. You can almost feel the rough texture against your fingertips, as though you're thumbing a chunk of pottery rather than something edible. And don't forget the quirky addition. Sometimes they flavored bread with herbs, honey, or even dates if they could afford the luxury. Imagine the thrill of biting into a sweetened loaf after weeks of plain barley-like, discovering chocolate chips in your oatmeal cookie when you expected raisins. It's a small pleasure, but one that lit up weary lives. You sit cross-legged, On the ground beside a family as they break their evening bread, the father dips chunks into a thick bean stew, while the mother sprinkles onion slices on top for extra bite. A child chews happily, oblivious to the dental doom building in their gums. You join them, tearing bread with your hands, the edges jagged and warm. There's a soft sense of belonging in this ordinary act, one repeated for thousands of years. But, of course, Egyptians couldn't resist mixing utility with spirituality. Bread was also sacred. In temples, priests stacked fresh loaves in front of statues of gods. The offerings weren't wasted. Once the ritual ended, the loaves found their way into the stomachs of priests and temple staff. That's right, gods got first dibs, but the humans never let leftovers go to waste. Picture a priest sneaking a bite and shrugging, "It's blessed now, right?" Historians still argue whether these offerings carried symbolic power beyond nourishment, or if they were simply convenient ways to recycle food back into the community. You let your mind wander to the tomb paintings, which almost always show people baking or eating. The Egyptians seemed obsessed with depicting food, almost as if they feared eternity without snacks. Their walls are lined with images of loaves piled high, like ancient grocery ads carved in stone. It's as if they were saying, "Don't worry, we'll always have bread-oven in the afterlife." As you lean back, the courtyard's sounds blend into a soothing rhythm, the scrape of querns, the crackle of ovens, the chatter of women comparing gossip about neighbors. One joke sneaks into your sleepy head. Imagine someone back then biting into a gritty loaf and exclaiming, tastes like sand," to which their neighbor replies, "That's the chef's special seasoning." The laughter is soft, like background music, carrying you deeper into the trance of history. And there's something profoundly human here. You think about your own late-night snacks, cookies, chips, maybe that cold pizza slice from the fridge. The Egyptians had their version of that too, except instead of melted cheese, it was a dense barley loaf that could double as a paperweight. Food is continuity. Across centuries, we've all wanted something warm, filling, and maybe just a little indulgent before bed. As the heat of the ovens makes you drowsy, you realize bread wasn't just nourishment, it was identity. To eat bread was to be Egyptian. To bake, it was to participate in a daily ritual that connected farmers, workers, priests, and kings alike. And though your teeth ache just thinking about the grit, there's comfort in knowing that even 4,000 years ago, people sat together at the end of the day, tearing bread, dipping, chewing, and sighing with contentment. The Nile whispers in the distance, a reminder that this bread, gritty, sacred, and essential, was born from the river's generous floods. You close your eyes, letting the smell of roasted crust and the faint crunch of sand between your teeth drift into a lullaby. And while your modern self might demand a dental plan, your ancient self curls up satisfied, bread in hand, ready for whatever tomorrow brings. You stir awake inside this dreamlike drift and realize you're clutching not a loaf of bread now, but a clay cup filled with something cloudy, foamy, and strangely alive. You lift it to your lips and taste the soul of ancient Egypt. Beer, not the crisp, golden lager you might crack open after mowing the lawn, but a thick, porridge-like drink that's equal parts bread, water, and fermentation magic. You sip again, and it's sweet, almost fruity, with a tang that hits your tongue like liquid sourdough. Imagine oatmeal soup had a tipsy cousin, and you're halfway there. The Egyptians adored their beer so much that it wasn't just a beverage. It was breakfast, lunch, and sometimes medicine. The workers who built pyramids, they weren't just fueled by sweat and onions. They received beer rations daily. Your mind lingers on the thought of men hauling massive limestone blocks under the blazing sun, only to pause and chug a frothy jug of brew. Modern athletes hydrate with electrolyte drinks. Ancient Egyptians hydrated with liquid bread. Historians still argue whether this kept them healthy or just pleasantly buzzed enough to keep stacking stones without complaining too much. You tilt the clay cup and notice bits of grain swirling around. It's not filtered. This drink is chewy. You roll a sip in your mouth and feel like you've just had a snack and a drink in one. Kids drank it too, though their version was lighter, weaker, almost like flavored water. Everyone from farmers to pharaohs had beer on the table. To not drink beer in Egypt would be like refusing rice in Asia or tortillas in Mexico. It wasn't optional. It was cultural DNA. The brewing process itself was an art. Barley loaves were baked until partially cooked, then crumbled into water and left to ferment. You picture women leaning over big clay jars, stirring with long paddles, humming little work songs as the air filled with a sweet, yeasty aroma. It's almost like a bakery and a brewery combined. You catch the scent in your imagination, now a warm, malty perfume rising from the jars, tangling with the smoke of cooking fires. But here's the quirky twist. Sometimes they flavored their beer with dates or herbs, giving it a complexity modern craft brewers would brag about in hip bars. Imagine an Egyptian beer menu. Try our date-infused pale porridge with hints of coriander and Nile mud. You chuckle softly at the idea of hipster brewers wearing linen kilts instead of flannel shirts. As you sit sipping, you hear laughter ripple through the courtyard. Two men are joking about who can drink more without toppling into the Nile. Their teeth gleam in the firelight, their cheeks flushed, their voices carrying over the sound of frogs croaking in the reeds. A priest passes by, shaking his head, but you notice he carries his own jug tucked discreetly under his arm. Sacred or not, no one's immune to the pull of this frothy brew. Beer wasn't just for fun, it was medicine, or at least they thought so. Doctors prescribed it for stomach troubles, to help digestion, even as a base for mixing herbs. One medical papyrus recommends beer with celery for treating headaches. You take another sip, imagining your modern pharmacist handing over a six-pack with a wink. Historians still argue whether the medicinal value came from actual compounds in the brew or from the sheer placebo of believing beer could heal anything. Either way, you nod. Slowly it worked well enough for them, and of course, the gods demanded their share. Temples brimmed with beer offerings. In the mythology, Hathor, goddess of joy, was closely linked with drunken celebration. One famous tale even describes her being pacified with vats of red-dyed beer after going on a divine rampage. You smile at the mental image. Humanity, saved by what was essentially the biggest beer pong game in history. You glance at the workers resting nearby, their clay cups tilted to the stars. They hum low songs, rhythmically tapping their feet, their day's exhaustion dissolving into the haze of fermented grain. One young boy sneaks a sip from his father's cup and makes a face, spitting out a mouthful of barley chunks, while his Father bursts into laughter. The boy wipes his mouth, muttering that the drink tastes like wet bread, which well is exactly what it is. You settle deeper into this hazy warmth, your body buzzing lightly, though no alcohol really touches you. Here, the dreamlike cadence of beer culture seeps in, steady and hypnotic. You realize that to be Egyptian wasn't just to farm and build and pray, but to drink, constantly, communally, ritualistically. Beer was the glue that held daily life together. The night air grows cooler, but the warmth of the clay cup lingers in your hands. You imagine drifting off on the Nile itself, bobbing in a little reed boat, cup in hand, stars overhead. Every sip becomes a lullaby, every swallow a step further into slumber. You're not worried about calories or carbs here. You're drifting into timeless comfort, nourished by the same cloudy drink that once fueled workers, healed the sick, and calmed the gods themselves. You lean back, exhaling slowly, and let the sweetness of ancient beer blur into your dreams, your body swaying like a reed in the river breeze. You wipe the foam of that barley beer from your lips, only to realize another craving hums just under the surface sweetness. Your eyes drift toward a low wooden tray, and there it is, sticky honey glistening in the firelight, thick like molten amber. You dip your finger into it and taste something pure, floral, and a little wild. This is the sugar of the ancient world, and Egyptians were obsessed with it. Every bee that buzzed near the Nile wasn't just an insect. It was a golden factory producing liquid luxury. Honey wasn't just dessert, it was treasure. Pharaohs kept entire hives under watch, and records describe honey being collected in clay jars, sealed, and even buried with the dead. Imagine lying for 3,000 years in your tomb, only to have archaeologists pop open a jar and find honey still edible. That's right, honey never spoils. Historians still argue whether Egyptians truly saw honey as food first or medicine first, because it was slathered on wounds, mixed into potions, and spooned into throats for sore voices. You lick another drop and decide it doesn't matter either way. It tasted divine. But the Egyptians had more tricks up their sleeve for sweet cravings. Dates were their candy bars, figs their chewy fruit snacks. You imagine slipping one into your mouth, thick-skinned, bursting with syrupy flavor. So sugary your teeth ache. Figs were so central that they appear in offerings to the gods, piled high in painted tomb scenes. You can almost see a servant carrying a basket so overflowing with figs that one or two tumble out, squishing softly into the dirt. And then there were raisin sun-dried grapes, wrinkled and sweet. A handful might be tossed into bread dough, giving you a surprise, sugary chew in an otherwise gritty loaf. You take a bite in your mind's eye, and it's a little like biting into a trail mix cookie from a health store, except your cookie is 4,000 years old and could probably double as a building material. Sometimes, when feasts came around, cooks made sweet cakes flavored with honey and shaped into animals or flowers. Picture a honey cake shaped like a lotus blossom, your hand sticky, your mouth full, your brain buzzing from the sugar rush. You chuckle softly, the original Egyptian energy bar. And in moments like this, it's easy to see how even ancient people needed a sugar hit after a long day. The quirky tidbit. Some recipes combined honey with crocodile fat or lard for medicinal treatments. Imagine chewing on that sticky, greasy mess, while your local healer promises it'll cure your cough. You laugh quietly, shaking your head, thankful your modern cough syrup doesn't taste like reptile dessert. Historians still argue whether these concoctions actually helped or if they were just desperate guesses. But the very thought makes your lips twitch in amusement as you sit with sticky fingers. You glance around the courtyard. Children run by with honey dripping down their chins, while elders chew slowly on figs, their eyes half closed in satisfaction. A mother scolds her son for dropping a raisin, then picks it up herself, wastes nothing, not when sweetness is so precious. You lean back, lulled by the faint hum of bees still working in their hives nearby. The buzz is steady, like a natural lullaby, blending with the crackle of torches and the murmur of night. You imagine drifting off with that sound in your ears, a soft reminder that sweetness was rare but cherished, even in this world of gritty bread and cloudy beer. And, of course, sweet foods weren't just indulgence, they were offerings. Temples overflowed with jars of honey, trays of dates, and baskets of figs. The gods were thought to favor sweetness, perhaps because it symbolized joy and abundance. Priests carried these offerings with solemn faces, though you suspect more. Then one priest licked their fingers when no one was watching. You pick up one last fig, bite into its chewy flesh, and let the syrupy sweetness spread across your tongue. It's thick, almost cloying, but in a way that makes you sink deeper into comfort. Sweetness is luxury. Sweetness is ritual. Sweetness is the same human craving that drives you today to sneak chocolate before bed. You smile faintly, recognizing yourself in these ancient snackers. The stars over the Nile blur a little, as though your eyelids are heavy. You let the stickiness of honey, the chew of dates, and the hum of bees dissolve into the background of your thoughts, carrying you deeper into the soft, sweet haze of history. You recline now, belly pleasantly full from bread and honey, and the scene shifts. No longer are you seated among the workers or wandering dusty courtyards. Instead, you find yourself on smooth alabaster floors, cool beneath your bare feet, and torches flickering from golden sconces. The air smells of roasted meats, exotic spices, and faint lotus perfume drifting from bowls scattered around the room. You've stepped into the royal feastan affair, designed not just to nourish, but to dazzle. You lower yourself onto a cushion, because chairs are optional when you're royalty, or at least pretending to be. A servant approaches, balancing a silver tray with slices of roasted goose glistening under a glaze of honey. The skin crackles when your teeth sink into it, the fat melting instantly, leaving behind a smoky sweetness. This isn't the rough barley bread of the farmers. This is indulgence, the kind that makes you sigh without realizing it, and you're not alone. Across the hall, nobles recline, too, gossiping between bites, occasionally gesturing dramatically with greasy fingers while whispering about politics and scandal. You pause for a moment and notice a detail often missed. Goose wasn't just food, it was status. Only the wealthy could afford to fatten birds specifically for the dining table. Piles of beef, ribs, roasted until tender, appear on another platter, their juices dripping onto fresh loaves below. Fish, skewered and grilled, exude a smoky aroma. Bowls of vegetables, leeks, cucumbers, and garlic line the edges, adding freshness to balance the meat-heavy menu. Historians still argue whether such lavish feasts were every day for the elite or reserved for rare occasions. But here, in this hall, they feel timeless, abundant, eternal. You sip from a goblet of wine, imported from faraway lands, because beer might be the drink of the people, but the elite crave something rarer. The wine is sharp, tart, with a sweetness that lingers. At the back of your throat, you swirl it lazily and catch a whiff of something resinous. Maybe frankincense was added to preserve it during transport. You make a face, chuckling softly, because even luxury has its quirks. Imagine drinking grape juice that's been sitting in a jar for months, flavored with pine sap, and then pretending you love it. The entertainment is no less rich than the menu. Musicians pluck harps, drums beat softly, and a dancer sways in slow, hypnotic movements, her jewelry jingling like distant bells. Guests laugh, clap, and lean in for more gossip. Who bribed which priest? Which official is secretly in debt? Which noble's goose farm mysteriously burned down? You roll your eyes at the pettiness, but you can't help grinning. Humans haven't changed much, have they? Then comes the quirky tidbit of the night. Servants bring out dishes shaped into animals. Not actual meat, but food, molded and decorated to resemble ducks, fish, or even tiny crocodiles. It's culinary art before Instagram existed. You poke at a pastry shaped like a fish, stuffed with figs and honey. It's adorable, if slightly unsettling, like eating a smiling cookie shaped like your dog. Historians still argue whether these creations were common practice or limited to ceremonial banquets. But either way, they're entertaining. You lean back, full and drowsy, as a servant places a cool cloth scented with lotus across your forehead. The feast continues around you, servants replenishing trays, nobles chuckling, children sneaking sweets from platters when their parents aren't looking. You nibble on a slice of melon, refreshing after so much heavy food, and it drips down your chin, sticky but satisfying. The hall grows louder with each passing jug of wine. Nobles laugh too loudly, servants move faster to keep up, and somewhere a drunken guest attempts to sing along with the harp. You chuckle again, imagining the embarrassment tomorrow morning when he realizes the entire court watched him croak like a frog. A gentle sarcasm curls through your thoughts. Ancient karaoke night, except no microphones, just a very confused harpist. And then you realize, even here, in the height of luxury, food isn't just fuel. It's a performance, a show of power, a way to remind everyone who's important and who isn't. The goose on your plate is as much a political statement as it is a meal. The more lavish the feast, the more powerful the host appears. You glance toward the far end of the hall, where the pharaoh sits, serene, barely eating, while everyone else gorges themselves. It's a silent reminder. He doesn't need to prove his wealth through food. His very presence is enough. Yet still, trays are piled high in front of him, as though the gods themselves might descend and demand a snack mid-banquet. Your eyelids feel heavy as the feast continues. The music slows, the torches flicker lower, and the rich aroma of roasted meats softens into a background hum of scents. You sigh, leaning into your cushion, your body sinking deeper, the noise of laughter and gossip blending into one long, comforting murmur. And as you close your eyes, one final detail lingers, the absurd contrast between rich and poor. Workers bite onions for dinner, while nobles gorge on goose. Yet both, in their own way, end the day with full stomachs, satisfied enough to drift into sleep. The banquet fades, and you carry the taste of roasted goose, sweet figs, and sharp wine into your dreams. You wake again, not on alabaster floors, with nobles gossiping, but under the open sky, the smell of sweat and dust sharp in your nostrils. The sound of stone scraping against stone fills the air. You glance up and see the skeleton of a pyramid, rising, block by massive block. Around you, hundreds of men grunt and heave, their muscles straining as ropes creak. These are the workers, the lifeblood of Egypt's grand monuments, and their meals are far humbler than the goose and wine of the court. You sit cross-legged on the ground beside them, and the food they share is blunt, practical, pungent onions, big, raw onions, torn open with bare hands and bitten like apples. The smell is overwhelming, sharp enough to make your eyes water, but they chew contentedly, smacking their lips. Alongside the onions are radishes, spicy and crisp, leaving a burn that lingers on the tongue. You take a bite, and it's like wasabi's older, earthier cousin. Your breath, you realize, could knock down a sphinx. Bread appears here too, of course, but it's rougher, harder, less adorned than the loaves at the feast. Workers dip it in water to soften the crust, then eat quickly, not lingering long before. Returning to hauling stone, and the ever-present beer-dark, cloudy heavies passed around in clay mugs. One gulp, and you're both hydrated and slightly lightheaded, just enough to make the endless labor tolerable. Historians still argue whether the beer truly energized them or simply dulled the pain. But you sip anyway, grateful for the illusion of relief. You glance around and notice something striking. While nobles show power through abundance, workers show resilience through simplicity. Their meals may be repetitive, but they fuel empires. Without onions, bread, and beer, these monuments would remain dreams scribbled on papyrus. You can almost hear a foreman barking orders, while his workers wipe onion juice from their beards and grunt back to the ropes. Quirky tidbit. The workers were so associated with onions that legends grew around them. Some say onions were offered as wages, valued like coins, because their layers symbolized eternity. Imagine clocking out after a brutal shift, not with cash, but with a sack of onions under your arm. You mutter, half amused, half horrified, "Guess I'll cry my way through payday." You crouch by one worker, his hands rough and cracked, as he rips apart bread and shares it with his neighbor. There's camaraderie in the way they eat simple food, shared quickly, nothing wasted. Children hover nearby, chewing radishes, giggling at each other's onion breath. You realize these meals are not only sustenance, but also solidarity. Every bite is a reminder. You're part of something bigger. The midday sun beats down, turning sweat into salt trails along your arms. You reach for a jug of beer again, its earthy temps cooling your throat. You lean back, imagining the rhythm of the work. Eat, drink, haul, repeat. And while historians debate whether the pyramids were built by slaves or paid workers, there's no debate about what fueled the labor: bread, onions, radishes, and beer. The humble quartet of Egyptian construction, cuisine, and humor, of course, creeps in. You picture a worker joking, "At least when I die, my tomb will smell like onions." The others laugh, their voices hoarse, the the sound bouncing across limestone blocks. In the background, a donkey brays, as if joining the joke. You chuckle too, the sound soft, mingling with the hot wind. Evening comes. The workers sit together, bones aching, muscles trembling. Their meals don't change much. Another round of bread, onions, beer, but their faces are softer now, smiles easier. You notice how the simple act of chewing beside one another transforms exhaustion into fellowship. They lean against each other, some humming tunes, others quietly dozing. The stars prick the darkening sky, and smoke from cook fires drifts upward in lazy spirals, and there's something profoundly human about it. You, too, have sat with coworkers after a long day, sharing a snack, complaining half-heartedly, laughing anyway. The details are different, but the feeling is the same. Whether it's pizza boxes after overtime or onions at the foot of a pyramid, food binds tired souls together. Historians still argue whether the workers truly enjoyed their rations or endured them. But you sense it doesn't matter. What matters is that the food kept them alive, kept them building, kept them dreaming. You close your eyes, the sharp bite of onions still lingering on your tongue, and you let the taste carry you toward sleep. The pyramid looms above, unfinished, but inevitable. Each stone a testament to labor fueled by humble, pungent meals. And as your head drifts against a warm stone block, the scent of onions and beer folds over you like a blanket, sharp yet oddly comforting. The pyramid dust fades from your nose, and suddenly you're walking along a caravan path. The horizon painted in swirls of gold and crimson as the sun sets over the desert. The air is drier here, sharper, and the ground crunches beneath your sandals. A line of donkeys plods past you, their backs piled high with baskets wrapped in woven mats. The scent that drifts from them is unexpected, warm, nutty, foreign. This is the world of exotic imports, the luxuries that traveled miles of sand to end up in Egyptian mouths. You pause as one trader unwraps his baskets, revealing sesame seeds glinting like tiny coins. You scoop a handful, letting them run through your fingers like sand. Roasted, they give off a toasty aroma, and you pop one in your mouth. It's delicate but rich, a flavor that feels oddly modern. Imagine biting into an ancient sesame snack bar, crumbly but satisfying. Sesame wasn't native here. It traveled across trade routes, prized for its oil and its ability to transform dull bread into something faintly gourmet. Another donkey shifts its load, and the mat peels back to reveal cinnamon sticks. You lean in and breathe deep. The scent is intoxicating, sharp, and sweet all at once. This is no ordinary Egyptian staple. This is luxury. Spices like cinnamon, myrrh, and frankincense came from faraway places like Punt, a land so shrouded in mystery that historians still argue whether it was modern Somalia, Eritrea, or somewhere along the Arabian coast. You smile at the thought, all this effort, all this distance, just so someone could sprinkle cinnamon into their wine or burn myrrh at a feast. That you trail behind the caravan into a bustling riverside market where traders lay out their treasures. A jar of sesame oil glistens like liquid gold in the fading light. You dip your bread into it, and suddenly your humble meal is transformed nutty, smooth, far less gritty than yesterday's worker's ration. Around you, people haggle loudly, shouting numbers, gesturing wildly. their voices rising above the braying of donkeys and the squawks of geese. Quirky tidbit. Along with food, traders sometimes carried live animals, baboons, monkeys, even exotic birds as gifts or curiosities for the elite. You picture a noblewoman in Thebes raising her eyebrows at the arrival of a monkey tugging at her honeycakes. You chuckle softly at the image. Thank you for this, pet. Do I feed it sesame seeds or figs? Historians still argue whether such animals were traded primarily as companions or as status symbols, but the chaos they caused at feasts must have been entertaining. You weave between stalls, the smells wrapping around you, dried fish mingling with spice, smoke, figs mixing with the nutty tang of sesame. Your senses are overloaded, but you slow your breathing, letting it soothe rather than overwhelm. The crackle of roasting nuts, the clink of copper scales weighing out goods, the soft thud of sacks being dropped, it all becomes a rhythm, steady and hypnotic. At one stall, a trader offers you dried dates rolled in sesame, a treat reserved for those who could afford imports. You take one and bite down its chewy, sticky, nutty, almost like an ancient energy ball from a modern health store. You grin at the thought that wellness bloggers would go wild for this authentic Egyptian soup. A priest wanders past, eyeing the spices suspiciously. Too much foreign influence, he mutters, could corrupt traditions. Yet you notice the jar he's tucking discreetly under his arm is full of cinnamon. Hypocrisy, you realize, has always been part of human history. The crowd thickens as torches are lit, casting a warm glow over the market. Storytellers stand on crates, shouting tales of how Punt is a land where trees bleed incense and rivers flow with gold. Children gasp, their eyes wide, while merchants smirk, knowing a little exaggeration sells better than honesty. You run your hand over a sack of dried chickpeas, the rough surface grounding you amid the fantastical chatter. Historians still argue how far Egypt's trade networks stretched. Some claim their ships reached India, others insist they never made it past the Red Sea. But here, in this dreamlike marketplace, boundaries blur. Everything feels possible. As night deepens, the traders pack up their goods, the scents lingering in the air like ghosts. You sit on a worn step, sesame seeds still on your tongue, the distant memory of cinnamon tingling your nose. You close your eyes and let the market fade into a steady hum, the clop of donkeys fading like a lullaby into the sand. The journey of flavor, sesame, cinnamon, dates becomes part of your dreamscape, proof that even in antiquity people longed for the thrill of something new, something different, something imported. You sigh, your body heavy with imagined fullness, and drift deeper, carried along the trade winds of history. You shuffle forward into the heart of the city, where the air is thick with dust, sweat, and something that makes your nose twitch, a mixture of fish, garlic, and a hint of something sweet baking in an oven nearby. You've stumbled into the Egyptian marketplace, and it's a sensory overload. The noise alone keeps you alert, merchants shouting over one another, children squealing, animals braying, and pots clanging as someone drops a ladle. It's chaotic, it's messy, and it smells like every aisle of a grocery store was squeezed into one narrow street. You push through the crowd, the ground gritty beneath your feet, until you find a stall where fish are laid out in neat rows, their eyes glassy and staring. Some are fresh from the Nile, others salted or dried for storage. The merchant gestures proudly at a massive Nile perch, its scales shimmering faintly under the sun. You imagine taking a bite of it grilled over coals, smoky and tender, though right now it mostly just smells like the inside of a bait bucket. Still, for Egyptians, fish was everyday fuel, cheap and abundant. Historians still argue whether certain fish were avoided for religious reasons. But in this market, nothing seems off-limits. If it swims, it sells. Next to the fish, a woman scoops lentils into baskets. The earthy scent wafts up as you run your hand through them, the tiny seeds slipping between your fingers like sand. Lentils were the quiet workhorse of Egyptian diets, turning into thick stews that bubbled in clay pots over open fires. You take a spoonful in your imagination, hearty, plain, filling, not glamorous, but it sticks to your ribs. And when paired with bread, it was a meal sturdy enough to keep workers going for hours. You step sideways and find yourself in front of a pile of garlic bulbs, their papery skins peeling, releasing sharp, pungent bursts into the air. Egyptians adored garlic, not just for flavor, but for supposed health benefits. Workers ate it daily, believing it gave them strength. You pop a clove into your mouth raw, fiery, biting, and nearly cough, tears springing to your eyes. The vendor laughs, slapping his knee, while your breath immediately transforms into a weapon. You grin sheepishly, wiping your eyes, muttering to yourself, ancient breath mints clearly weren't a thing. Quirky tidbit: some records claim garlic was so valued that it could be used to pay workers. Imagine turning up for your shift and being handed a bundle of garlic bulbs instead of coins. You smirk. Wages in garlic might make you rich in flavor, but poor in friends. Historians still argue whether this practice was widespread or just symbolic, but it's amusing to picture. A laborer bragging about his salary while chewing noisily on a clove. The market isn't just about staples. You notice trays of cucumbers, fresh and cool to the touch, perfect for cutting through the heaviness of bread and beans. Next to them, onions piled high, their sharp scent mingling with the garlic until your eyes water. Children dart past, carrying baskets of figs, their laughter echoing over the din. You watch one boy sneak a fig from his basket, pop it into his mouth, and grin with sticky cheeks before his mother scolds him. A group of women argue over the price of coriander, their voices rising like a chorus. The herbs fill the air with a grassy, lemony scent, subtle but refreshing against the harsher smells. You lean closer and inhale deeply, grateful for a moment of balance. And then comes the noise of animals: geese honking, donkeys braying, goats bleating. The geese waddle through the crowd like they own the place, occasionally nipping at someone's ankle. One vendor waves a stick, shouting curses at them, while a child giggles uncontrollably. You watch the chaos unfold and realize that markets weren't quiet, civilized affairs. They were living, breathing carnivals of survival. The sounds wash over you, the clink of weights on copper scales, the slap of fish hitting wooden tables, the chatter of buyers debating loudly. A man bites into a radish, crunching so loudly it cuts through the noise like a drumbeat. Someone else sneezes dramatically as garlic smoke hits their nose. It's messy, but somehow the rhythm feels familiar, even comforting. Historians still argue whether markets were strictly regulated by officials or more freewheeling, but as you wander here, you sense both. A scribe sits in the corner, tallying transactions on a scroll, while two vendors argue passionately about whose beans are fresher. Order and chaos exist side by side. You stop at a stall where a pot of lentil stew simmers. The vendor ladles some into a bowl, sprinkles it with coriander, and hands it to you. You take a spoonful, thick, warm, earthy, with just a kick of spice. Around you, others eat quickly, slurping noisily, wiping their mouths with the backs of their hands before diving back into haggling. You smile. Food here isn't elegant, but it's real, communal, raw, quirky detail. Some wealthier buyers added dried locusts to their shopping lists, crunchy, salty, protein-packed. You imagine buying a bag of roasted locusts like modern trail mix. You smirk, thinking high in protein, low in friends. Historians still argue whether locust eating was common or reserved for desperate times. But the thought lingers as you crunch a pretend insect between your teeth. The sun dips lower, shadows stretching across the stalls. Torches flare, casting flickering light over the crowd. The smells intensify: fish, now sharper, garlic thicker, lentils richer. The noise softens into a low murmur as some traders pack up for the night, while others keep selling, hoping for a few last coins. You sit on a worn stone step, bowl of stew in your lap, the chatter and scents swirling around you. You breathe slowly, letting the pungency fade into something oddly soothing. The market isn't glamorous, it's pungent, chaotic, a little overwhelming, but it's alive. And as you close your eyes, spoon halfway to your mouth, the hum of bargaining voices becomes a lullaby, carrying you deeper into a gentle, garlic-scented dream. You let the marketplace fade, its garlic bite and fishy tang dissolving into silence. And when you open your eyes again, you're standing inside a temple courtyard. The air here feels different, heavier, more reverent. Torches flicker against towering stone walls carved with hieroglyphs, and the scent isn't of garlic or beer this time, but of incense, beeswax, and freshly baked bread. All around you, offerings are being prepared, not just for human mouths, but for gods themselves. A priest glides past in crisp white linen, carrying a tray piled high with loaves. These aren't just random leftovers from someone's kitchen. They've been shaped carefully into cones, discs, and even animal forms, baked specifically to be pleasing to divine eyes. He sets them down at the foot of a statue, a towering figure of Osiris, staring blankly into eternity. You watch the priest bow, then step back, hands raised, as though expecting thunder to roll. But nothing happens. The bread sits, steaming softly in the cool temple air. Nearby, another offering is being set, jugs of beer, frothy and bubbling. A young acolyte staggers under the weight of one, nearly spilling it before regaining his balance. He mutters something under his breath, and you can't help but grin, imagining him whispering, "Sorry, Hathor, almost wasted your drink." The clay jars are lined up neatly before the statues, forming what looks like a bar menu for God's bread. Beer, figs, honey, cucumbers. It's less about nutrition, more about respect, gratitude, and maybe a little insurance for the future. And here's the fascinating thing. Once the ritual was done, the food didn't stay with the gods. Priests took it back, eating what had been sanctified. Imagine that your lunch doubles as divine leftovers. Historians still argue whether people believed the gods literally consumed the essence of the food, leaving behind only physical shells, or if everyone quietly acknowledged it as a symbolic gesture. Either way, the priests seemed happy enough to polish off godly bread. You walk closer and notice little bowls of vegetables placed neatly beside the loaves. Leeks, onions, garlic, simple foods elevated to sacred status. The scent rises faintly, mixing with incense smoke until you can't quite tell where the kitchen ends and the divine begins. And then you spot a plate of figs, arranged in a perfect circle. You reach out, pluck one, and take a slow bite. Sweet, chewy, and sticky. It clings to your teeth almost defiantly. You chuckle softly, murmuring, "Sorry, Osiris, you weren't quick enough." Quirky tidbit. Archaeologists have found shrines with tiny clay models of food mini-loaves, miniature jars, even fake cuts of midiford when real food was too expensive. Imagine a priest solemnly presenting a clay drumstick and whispering, "Hope you don't mind the symbolic gesture." Historians still argue whether the gods were thought to accept these substitutes, or if it was purely a visual reminder of devotion. Either way, the little clay cakes endure as evidence of both faith and frugality. The chanting begins, low and rhythmic, voices of priests echoing against stone walls. You feel the vibration in your chest more than you hear it in your ears. It's soothing, steady, like waves against the shore. You sway slightly, lulled by the repetition, the smell of incense wrapping around you like a warm blanket. In the dim light, the loaves of bread seem to glow. The beer jars sweat with condensation. The figs glisten like jewels. Food here isn't just sustenance, it's cosmic currency. You glance upward, past the torchlight, into the looming darkness of the temple roof. In your half-sleepy imagination, you picture the gods leaning down, sniffing curiously, deciding whether today's offerings are satisfactory. A faint smile curls your lips at the absurdity of it. Eternal beings, picky about onion arrangements. Yet the devotion feels real, tangible, as though every crumb carries weight. As the ritual winds down, the priests begin carefully removing the offerings. One hands you a loaf, still warm, and gestures for you to eat. You take a bite, and, though it's just bread, grainy, chewy, a little burnt on one side, tastes different. Maybe it's the incense in the air. Maybe it's the chanting still, vibrating in your chest. Or maybe it's simply the power of context. You swallow slowly, savoring the quiet thought. Food here is not just about living, it's about meaning. A priest nearby smirks as he sneaks a sip of the divine beer, his eyes glancing sideways as though daring you to laugh. You do, quietly, and the sound bounces lightly against the stone walls before dissolving into the chanting hum. The night deepens. The torches sputter lower. The smell of bread lingers long after the trays have been cleared. You settle onto the cool temple floor, head resting against the stone, eyelids heavy. Around you, the echoes of offerings, loaves, beer, figs blur into a dreamlike haze, reminders that for Egyptians, food was as much for gods as for mortals. Historians still argue whether the gods actually needed these meals or whether it was purely for human comfort. But you know the truth in your bones. Sometimes rituals aren't about what the divine consumes, but about what the human heart needs to give. And with that thought, you drift further into sleep, the scent of sacred bread cushioning you like a pillow. The temple walls blur away, and now you're seated on a low stool beside a healer's workbench. The room smells like crushed herbs, smoke, and something sour that makes your nose wrinkle. Clay jars line the shelves, each scribbled with faded hieroglyphs. Bundles of dried plants hang overhead, and the healer in front of you, an older man with sharp eyes, grinds something in a stone mortar. He sprinkles the powder into a cup of beer, stirs it with a carved stick, and pushes it toward you. Drink, he insists. And just like that, you're about to taste Egypt's medicinal munchies. You lift the cup and sniff. The beer already smells earthy, but now there's a sharp herbal kick. Celery, maybe coriander, maybe something unidentifiable. You sip, and the taste is strange, bitter and sweet all at once, leaving a prickling sensation at the back of your throat. The healer nods approvingly. This concoction, he claims, will balance your body, soothe your stomach, and calm your nerves. You can't help but chuckle under your breath. Basically ancient Pepto-Bismol, but with a buzz. Medicinal snacks weren't just brews, though. Bread itself could be medicine. You glance at the workbench and see loaves studded with herbs, garlic baked in, coriander mixed through, even honey drizzled across the crust. The healer explains that garlic strengthens the body, honey heals wounds, and coriander cools fevers. You take a bite of a garlicky loaf. The flavor is sharp, almost spicy, the kind of bread that clears your sinuses, whether you want it to or not. You chew slowly, your tongue tingling, and wonder if it's working magic or just making your breath dangerous again. Historians still argue whether these remedies were truly effective or just ritual placebo. But here, the line between medicine and food blurs until you can't tell the difference. A woman enters, holding her child, who's coughing weakly. The healer mixes crushed figs into a paste, spreads it on bread, and hands it to the child. The sweetness masks the bitterness of the herbs hidden inside. You watch as the boy chews reluctantly, then curls against his mother, soothed, if not cured. The healer smiles, satisfied. You realize medicine here isn't just about chemistry, it's about comfort, ritual, the reassurance of being fed when you're ill. Quirky tidbit: some remedies were downright bizarre. Crocodile dung mixed with honey, donkey's milk infused with herbs, even fried mice for earaches. You stifle a laugh, imagining someone nibbling a rodent and claiming it's for health. The healer glares at you, clearly not finding it funny. You bow your head apologetically, though inside you're still smirking. Historians still argue whether these strange recipes were desperation or genuine tradition, but they leave behind a trail of eyebrow-raising prescriptions. You lean back, watching as the healer prepares more snacks: dried dates mashed with herbs, little pellets of barley rolled with honey and poppy seeds, even onions stuffed with medicinal paste. Each bite is both cure and curse, palatable enough to swallow, strange enough to make you question whether it'll work. You sip more of the herbal beer, the bitterness now oddly soothing, like your taste buds have surrendered. Outside, the sounds of the marketplace drift faintly through the window: donkeys braying, people bargaining, but inside the chamber, it's calm. The healer works methodically, grinding, mixing, baking, handing out snacks to the sick. You feel yourself lulled by the rhythm of his movements, the scrape of stone against stone, the splash of liquid into jars, the soft crackle of herbs burning in the brazier. And here's a curious detail. Some remedies weren't meant to be eaten by humans at all. Certain breads or cakes were baked for the dead, infused with herbs to protect them in the afterlife. You picture a mummy nibbling on coriander bread in eternity, muttering, "Still better than pyramid onions." You grin softly, the absurdity lightening your drowsy mind. The healer turns to you, presses another loaf into your hands. This one smells faintly of juniper and honey. You take a slow bite. The sweetness masks the bitterness, but just barely. You chew, swallow, and feel warmth spreading down your chest, whether from the herbs or from suggestion. It doesn't matter. The act of eating is enough to convince your body it's healing. And maybe that's the real medicine here, belief. Historians still argue whether Egyptian medicine was advanced or primitive, but you sense both truths. Some remedies genuinely worked: garlic for circulation, honey as antibacterial. Others, like crocodile dung paste, were sheer superstition. But all of them share one theme: healing came with a mouthful, a bite, a sip. Food and medicine were inseparable. The torches burn low in the healer's room, casting long shadows over jars and herbs. The air is heavy with the mingled scents of coriander, garlic, honey, and smoke. You set your empty cup aside, your eyelids drooping. The scrape of the mortar becomes slower, softer, like a lullaby. You rest your head against the cool wall, the taste of bitter beer still lingering on your tongue, and let the steady rhythm of ancient medicine carry you deeper into sleep. The healer's chamber dissolves, and now you're standing beneath a starlit sky. Around a low fire, a group of villagers sit in a circle, their hands cupped protectively around small objects. They aren't eating bread or onions or figs tonight. Instead, they're crunching on tiny charm seeds, roasted until brittle. They're snacks for luck. You crouch closer, watching as a woman tips a handful of roasted chickpeas into her mouth. She chews slowly, muttering a prayer under her breath. Another man holds a little pouch of sesame seeds, sprinkling a few into his palm before tossing them back like sunflower seeds. At a baseball game, he winks, as though each bite might ward off misfortune. Historians still argue whether such rituals were widely believed or just practiced in smaller pockets of society. But here, in the firelight, it feels serious. Then comes the strangest detail. A young boy proudly shows you a scarab beetle, dried and lacquered, its shell gleaming under the fire. He crunches down on it with exaggerated flair, earning laughter from the group. Was it for courage, protection, or maybe just the ancient version of a dare? You shake your head, chuckling softly, imagining a kid today biting into a plastic toy bug and pretending it's candy. Some traditions, it seems, never die. The fire pops, sparks leaping into the dark. A woman hands you a small cake shaped like an amulet, half expecting lightning to strike. But instead you just get a mouthful of sticky sweetness. You chew slowly, amused by the thought. That dessert here doubles as divine insurance. Quirky tidbit. Some magical snacks weren't eaten at all. They were carried, tucked into amulets, or sewn into clothes. Seeds, beans, even crumbs of bread were thought to protect the wearer from illness or curses. Imagine telling someone you're wearing bread for good luck. Historians still argue whether the protective power was symbolic or literal, but the practice was widespread enough to leave traces in burial sites. You lean back on your hands, staring at the night sky. The villagers crunch seeds rhythmically, their prayers rising softly like smoke. You pop them into your mouth. Before long, you find yourself chewing in rhythm with the group, the crunch echoing into the still night. The air is cool, a relief after the heat of the day. Crickets chirp, frogs croak faintly near the river, and the fire crackles with each log dropped onto it. Someone tells a story, half myth, half bedtime tale about how the gods created seeds to trap bad spirits inside. Eat the seeds, he says, and you trap the spirit before it can find you. You chuckle softly, realizing this is ancient comfort food in more ways than one. Not only does it fill your stomach, it fills your fear with reassurance. A child curls up beside you, her cheeks full of sesame seeds, her eyelids drooping. Her mother tucks a little amulet-shaped cake into her hand, whispering that it will keep nightmares away. You watch the girl drift into sleep, her hand still clinging to the crumbly charm, and your chest softens. Superstition or not, the gesture feels timeless. Always need something small to cling to against the unknown. Historians still argue whether these practices were purely symbolic or whether people genuinely believed every crunch chased away evil. But you know the truth doesn't matter. Belief is its own nourishment. The villagers chew their charms, swap jokes, share stories, and drift into sleep under the stars, feeling safe. And isn't that the point? You pop another handful of roasted barley into your mouth. The crunch is steady, soothing, almost hypnotic. You close your eyes, the taste earthy and warm. The fires crackle, blending with the soft hum of voices fading into night. You curl onto your side, the seed crunch still echoing faintly in your ears, like a lullaby carved in sound. And with that rhythm, you drift deeper, comforted not by the taste, but by the idea that even in a world full of uncertainty, a handful of seeds or a bite of honey cake could make you believe tomorrow would be just a little kinder. The firelight fades, the crackle of seeds dies away, and now you find yourself standing near the river's edge at dawn. Mist rises from the water, curling in soft ribbons, and fishermen haul nets heavy with wriggling silver bodies. But behind them, further up the bank, something stranger is happening. Hunters drag their kills into camp, and you realize you're about to witness some of the oddest things Egyptians ever considered edible. One man lays down the hulking body of a hippopotamus, calf. Its thick hide glistens with river water, and you can't help but think, that's not exactly your everyday dinner. Yet records show that hippo meat was sometimes eaten, though more often reserved for feasts or daring hunts. You imagine taking a bite, rich, dense, slightly gamey, a flavor halfway between pork and something wilder. It's the kind of meat you eat once and then brag about for a lifetime. Historians still argue whether hippos were truly a common food or mostly symbolic prey. But the possibility of hippo stew leaves your imagination reeling. Closer to the fire, another hunter drags a crocodile. The villagers crowd around, half in awe, half in fear. Its jaws are bound, its scales gleaming, its body enormous. The smell of river mud clings to it, sharp and swampy. Crocodile meat, when roasted, was considered a delicacy in some regions, though others avoided it for religious reasons. You picture a family carving into thick white flesh, chewing carefully, muttering about divine protection as they eat. You take a tentative, imaginary bite, tough, fishy, with a faint swamp aftertaste. You grimace, muttering to yourself, definitely not chicken. And then come the insects. Children run past carrying baskets of roasted locusts, their legs crackling as they're tossed into clay bowls. You pick one up, it's light, brittle, almost weightless. You pop it into your mouth, crunch, salty, nutty, surprisingly tolerable. You chuckle softly, realizing this is ancient popcorn. A group of kids shove them into their mouths by the handful, giggling as the shells stick between their teeth. Quirky tidbit. In some drought years, locust swarms were devastating, but instead of panicking, Egyptians turned them into snacks. Historians still argue whether this was survival, improvisation, or long-standing tradition, but either way, nothing went to waste. Nearby, hunters roast wild birds, beezes, ducks, quail. The smell is more familiar, savory and smoky, the fat dripping onto hot coals. You take a bite of roasted quail in your imagination, and it's tender, juicy, a welcome relief after imagining crocodile jerky. A man jokes loudly, holding up an ibis leg, claiming it's food of the gods. The others laugh, though some glance nervously toward the temple, worried about divine retribution for such jokes. And then someone pulls out something truly strange, dried lizards, skewered like kebabs. You blink. Are they food? Medicine? Both? The villagers chew thoughtfully, as though it's no more unusual than garlic bread. You shake your head, smiling softly. Humans, it seems, will eat just about anything if it's roasted long enough. The air fills with the mingled smells of roasting meat, sizzling fat, and earthy smoke. You sit cross-legged, a bowl of locusts in your lap, watching the hunters boast about their bravery. One slaps his chest, claiming he looked a crocodile in the eye before spearing it. Another counters with a tale of wrestling a hippo in shallow water. Their voices rise with laughter, their pride as nourishing as the food itself. Quirky detail. Some Egyptians believed eating certain animals could transfer their strength. Crocodile meat for ferocity, hippo meat for endurance, locusts for resilience. You grin, chewing slowly on your roasted locust, muttering, "So, does this make me resilient or just crunchy?" Historians still argue how widespread these beliefs were, but the symbolism is obvious even now. As the meal continues, the children grow bolder. One boy waves a locust leg like a toothpick, pretending to be a nobleman. Another dares his friend to nibble on crocodile fat. The laughter echoes across the river, softening the strangeness into play. You realize that what seems bizarre to you was, for them, part of life, part of surviving a land where the Nile gave much, but demanded creativity in return. The mist lifts slowly, revealing the sun climbing higher. The river sparkles, birds cry overhead, and the smell of roasted hippo and crocodile mingles with the crunch of locusts. It's strange, yes, but also oddly grounding. Nothing here is wasted. Everything, beast, bird, insect, becomes part of the cycle of life, eaten with laughter, shared with family, remembered in stories. Historians still argue whether Egyptians truly relished these oddities, or simply endured them. But you sense a mixture of both. Some bites are feasts, others desperation. Yet every bite tells the same story: resilience, adaptation, imagination. You pop another locust into your mouth, chew slowly, and lean back against a warm stone. The sun is brighter now, your body heavier, your eyelids drooping. The laughter of hunters and the crunch of insects fade into a soothing background hum. You sigh softly, amused and comforted all at once, and let yourself drift, carried deeper by the strangeness of Egypt's table. The riverbank fades, the crunch of locusts dissolves into silence. And when your eyes open again, the world is alight with color and noise. Torches blaze, drums pound, and laughter spills into the night like overflowing wine. You've stepped straight into the middle of a festival, and here, food isn't just fuel, it's the centerpiece of celebration. All around you, people sway to the rhythm of sistrums and hand drums. Dancers spin, their linen skirts flaring, their anklets jingling like rain. The air is thick with the scent of roasted meat, honey cakes, and the smoky tang of wine splashing from jars. You're swept up in a tide of bodies, and before you bite in, and nearly sights soft, sweet, and spiced faintly with coriander. It tastes like joy itself. Festivals in Egypt were more than parties, they were acts of devotion. The food was both offering and indulgence. Bowls of sweet porridge, made from wheat and milk, spiced with cinnamon and honey, were passed around. Skewers of roasted duck dripped fat into the fire, sizzling as the crowd cheered. You take one in your hand, bite into the tender flesh, and the flavor explodes with smoke and salt. Some festivals encouraged drinking contests. Great vats of beer were prepared, and revelers challenged each other to gulp until they toppled over. You watch one man wobble dramatically, swaying like a palm tree in the wind before falling backward into the sand, his friends howling with laughter. Someone props him up with another jug anyway, shouting, "Hathor demands it." You chuckle under your breath, imagining an ancient Egyptian version of frat parties, minus the red solo cups. Historians still argue whether these contests were religious duty or just human mischief disguised as worship. But either way, spirits flowed freely as you wander deeper into the crowd. You pass a stall where cakes shaped like animals are stacked in pyramids: lotus cakes, crocodile cakes, fish cakes, siege, one sugary, sticky, molded with care. Children dart forward, grabbing them with squeals, their faces smeared with honey in seconds. One girl proudly shows you a tiny cake shaped like a goose before devouring its head in a single bite. You grin, remembering the goose feasts of nobles, now transformed into sweet treats for the masses. The drums grow louder, echoing in your chest. The festival is alive, pulsing, chaotic. The smells keep shifting. Grilled fish from one fire, fresh. Cucumbers sliced with salt from another. Even roasted nuts tossed with honey and sesame. You grab a handful, chew thoughtfully. The crunch is satisfying. The sweetness clings to your teeth, and the nutty aftertaste grounds you amid the chaos. Nearby, a priest sprinkles wine on the ground in offering, then takes a hefty gulp himself. His eyes twinkle mischievously as he wipes his mouth. The crowd roars in approval. This isn't solemn worship, it's a shared release, a chance to forget the grind of fields and quarries, the weight of daily toil. Tonight, the gods feast with the people, and everyone eats until their stomachs ache. You pause to watch a line of dancers, their bodies shimmering with oil, their movements fluid as water. They carry trays of bread and cakes, weaving through the crowd, handing out food as though distributing blessings. One dancer presses a small roll into your hand. You bite into it soft, filled with dried figs, a burst of sweetness in the middle of plain dough. The crowd cheers again as the music builds, faster and faster, until even your foot taps in time. Quirky detail. Some festivals included food fights of sorts, not the messy tomato-throwing kind, but symbolic tossing of cakes and loaves into the crowd. The idea was abundance. If food rains down, prosperity follows. You duck as a honey cake whizzes past your ear and splatters against the ground. A child scoops it up instantly, still grinning, unbothered by dust. You laugh softly, shaking your head. 5-second rule clearly existed even then. Historians still argue whether this practice was ritual or rowdy improvisation, but it's easy. Fires blaze higher, drums pound harder, and the food keeps flowing. You sip wine, eat cake, nibble cucumbers, chew nuts, until your stomach feels heavy in the best way. Around you, people dance until they collapse, only to rise again when another jug is passed their way. The gods, you realize, aren't just honored, they're celebrated, invited to laugh and eat along. As your eyelids grow heavy, you recline against a warm stone wall, cake crumbs on your lap, the faint taste of honey still clinging to your tongue. The drums soften in your ears. The laughter blurs into a steady hum, and the smell of roasting meat lingers like a lullaby. You smile faintly, realizing that joy itself was on the menu here. Food wasn't just about filling bellies, it was about, but lying here, head heavy, body full, you know the truth doesn't matter. What matters is the memory of sweetness on your tongue, music in your ears, and the sense of belonging that comes from sharing a meal under the stars. And as the firelight flickers lower, you close your eyes, drifting deeper into sleep with honey on your lips and drums echoing faintly in your dreams. The festival fades away, its drums and laughter dissolving into quiet. And when your eyes open again, the air feels gentler. The sun is lower, painting everything in gold, and you find yourself outside a modest mud brick house. The laughter here is different, softer, lighter, the kind that belongs to children. And sure enough, you see them running barefoot in the dust, their hands sticky with something sweet. This isn't a royal feast or a wild festival. This is home life. Tonight, you're watching how Egyptian kids were bribed, rewarded, and comforted. With simple treats, you step closer and notice one boy sitting cross-legged on the ground, gnawing on a dried fig. It's chewy, thick, and so sweet it almost looks like toffee. His little sister tries to snatch it, but he pulls it away, triumphant. Their mother sighs, then hands her a handful of raisins instead. She pops them into her mouth, her lips purpled from the juice. These weren't luxuries. Here, they were the ancient equivalent of candy bars, handed to children as snacks after chores or lessons. You chuckle quietly, realizing parents bribing kids with sugar is one tradition that never died. Inside the house, you see a basket of dates sitting near the hearth. A father takes one, splits it open, and stuffs it with a dollop of honey before handing it to his youngest child. The boy's eyes light up. He chomps down, honey oozing down his chin, and laughs with sticky delight. You smile warmly, knowing exactly how that feels. There's nothing quite like the joy of sugar when you're young. Historians still argue whether sweets were an everyday indulgence for ordinary families or reserved for special occasions. But in this little snapshot, it feels normal, routine, woven into childhood itself. And here's the quirky tidbit. Archaeologists have found tiny clay toys shaped like animals alongside jars of dried fruit in tombs. It suggests kids may have been given both toys and snacks as afterlife provisions. You imagine a little Egyptian ghost tugging on his mother's sleeve, saying, "Can I have both, please?" And you can't help but grin. Back outside, a group of children gather around a neighbor who's roasting chickpeas over a small fire. He tosses them into the air, catching them in his mouth, making the children squeal with laughter. Then he hands them out one by one. The kids crunch noisily, the sound crisp and rhythmic. To them, it's just fun, food, salty, crunchy, easy to grab. To you, it feels like the ancestor of movie popcorn. You smirk, whispering to yourself, ancient Netflix snacks. The parents, meanwhile, watch fondly as their kids lick honey off their fingers and trade raisins like currency. One girl offers 2 raisins for a fig. The deal is made, sealed with giggles. You realize childhood bartering hasn't changed much, except now it's Pikmin cards or chocolate bars instead of dried fruit. A mother leans down and hands her child a little cake shaped like a lotus flower. It's sweetened with dates and dusted with crushed nuts. The girl nibbles it slowly, savoring every bite. You take one too. It crumbles softly in your mouth, nutty and fragrant, leaving behind a faint floral taste. It's delicate compared to the raw sweetness of figs or dates, but it feels like something special, reserved for when kids behaved or celebrated small victories. Quirky detail. Some remedies for cranky children included feeding them honey mixed with herbs, meant to calm them down. Imagine a toddler refusing to nap until you bribe them with medicine that's basically a sugary treat. You chuckle softly, picturing ancient parents rolling their eyes in exactly the same way modern ones do. Historians still argue whether this worked because of the herbs or simply because kids were distracted by sweetness. But either way, bedtime must have been easier with a spoonful of honey. The evening light grows softer, and the children's play slows. Some lie back in the dust, full from their little feasts. Others curl against their parents, clutching figs or cakes like stuffed toys. The smell of roasted chickpeas lingers in the air, mingling with the faint sweetness of honey. You close your eyes and listen. The sound of children's laughter fades into softer breaths, the kind that signal sleep. You remember your own childhood snacks, cookies before bed, maybe a piece of candy from a hidden stash, and suddenly the distance between your world and theirs shrinks. Whether it's raisins in ancient Egypt or gummies today, the joy is the same. The way a sweet bite can turn chores into games, or calm into comfort, or night into something safe. Historians still argue whether children had as much access to sweets as adults, but the evidence of dried fruit in tombs and sticky fingerprints in kitchens suggests they did. And maybe, just maybe, they had it better than the adults. After all, no one begrudges a child a fig. Even in lean times, you lean back against the mud brick wall, the warm stone at your back, the faint taste of raisins on your tongue. Around you, children's giggles melt into yawns. A soft breeze stirs, the dust carrying with it the scent of honey, fruit, and roasted nuts. You exhale slowly, your own body heavy now, your eyes drooping, and as the night deepens, you drift into sleep alongside the children, comforted by the sweetness that binds. Every generation proof that even in the humblest homes, joy was found in small, sticky bites. The gentle sound of children's laughter dissolves, and when you open your eyes again, the air feels cool, stale, and heavy. You're standing in the quiet of a tomb, the flicker of a torch throwing shadows against painted walls. The colors are still bright figures carrying baskets of bread, jars of beer, trays of fruit, but the silence presses in like a blanket. This is no ordinary meal. These are tomb provisions, the leftovers meant to feed the dead forever. You step closer to a cluster of jars sealed with clay stoppers. Their surfaces are dusty, but the faint smell of something fermented still lingers. Beer, not for workers this time, but for the afterlife. You brush your hand across the jar, and your mind fills with the image of a ghostly pharaoh tipping it back, gulping in eternity. You grin softly, whispering, "Eternal happy hour." Historians still argue whether Egyptians truly believed food physically transformed for the dead, or if it was purely symbolic. But the jars are real heavy, and often still full when uncovered by archaeologists. You kneel before a basket of dried fish, brittle now, their smell faint but unmistakable. Once, they were carefully salted to last through centuries. You pick one up, and it flakes into dust between your fingers. You imagine someone thousands of years ago carefully packing it, thinking, better safe than sorry. Let's make sure he's not hungry. The practicality feels almost tender. Nearby, clay bowls hold shriveled figs and dates, blackened with time but still recognizable. You pick one up and bite experimentally in your imagination. The texture is leathery, the taste faint, but it's their sweetness that survived millennia. You blink in quiet amazement. Food has always been temporary, fleeting, but here it lingers, stubbornly defying time. And then you notice something odder. A jar filled with pickled vegetables, cucumbers, perhaps onions, still sealed tight. The smell when opened is sharp, sour, enough to make you wrinkle your nose. Ancient pickles. You laugh softly, muttering, the world's oldest fridge. Quirky tidbit. Archaeologists really have found jars of preserved foods in tombs, still recognizable after thousands of years. Historians still argue whether they were ever meant to be eaten by the dead or simply to represent abundance. But the fact remains, Egyptians couldn't imagine eternity without snacks. On a nearby shelf, you spot small loaves of bread hardened to stone. They look edible from afar, but when you pick one up, it's rock solid, heavy enough to break teeth. Still, you imagine a ghost breaking it open, dipping it into a bowl of honey, chewing happily under the painted ceiling. The act of imagining is enough to make the tomb feel less eerie, more like a pantry than a grave. You walk deeper and see painted scenes on the wall. Servants carrying trays of roasted meats, ducks with their wings outstretched, cakes piled high. The details are exquisite, as if the artist wanted to make sure the dead had every flavor memorized. Food here isn't just sustenance, it's memory, art, identity. To be without it in the afterlife would be unthinkable. Quirky detail. Some tombs even included clay models of food and servants, as though the dead could summon them at will. You smile at the thought of a ghost clicking his fingers and having a tiny clay baker spring to life, kneading bread for eternity. Historians still argue whether the models were truly substitutes or just symbolic decoration, but they remain charming glimpses of afterlife expectations. The silence grows thicker, but it's not frightening. It's calm, heavy with reverence. You run your hand along the cool stone, feeling the grooves of carved hieroglyphs beneath your fingers. They whisper prayers, spells, invocations to ensure the food never runs out. One inscription catches your eye, a wish for loaves of bread, jars of beer, cuts of meat, and sweet figs in eternity. You close your eyes and imagine hearing that whispered over your shoulder as you fall asleep. You sit down on the tomb floor, cross-legged among jars and baskets, and nibble on an imaginary fig. It's chewy, leathery, and oddly comforting. You take a sip from an imaginary beer jar, cloudy, earthy, still foamy, despite its age. It feels almost real. You let the flavors linger on your tongue as you breathe in the stale air. The torchlight flickers, casting shadows that look like servants moving trays. For a moment, you almost believe you see them ghostly waiters passing by, offering bread, fish, honey, figs. You smile faintly, whispering thanks, as though you're a guest at their eternal banquet. Historians still argue whether the dead were thought to literally eat these provisions or merely absorb their essence. But you realize it doesn't matter. What matters is that the living believed food was necessary even beyond death. To pack bread and figs into a tomb was an act of love, a way of saying, "We won't let you go hungry, not now, not ever." The torch burns lower, and the tomb grows darker. The jars stand silent, the baskets still, but the idea of abundance lingers in the air like incense. You lean back against the cool stone eyelids, heavy, your stomach warm from imaginary figs and beer. The thought drifts across your mind like a whisper. Food is memory. Food is love. Food is eternity. And with that, you let yourself sink deeper into sleep, lulled by the quiet promise of loaves and jars, waiting patiently for 1,000 lifetimes. The tomb walls dim, their painted feasts fading into shadows. And when you blink again, you're no longer among jars and offerings. Instead, you're outside, the air alive with smoke and the crackle of flames. The smell hits you: first bread, baking, meat, sizzling, spices wafting through the air. You're standing by an open-air kitchen where Egyptian cooking quirks reveal themselves in all their smoky, imperfect glory. A clay oven squats in the corner, shaped like a beehive, its mouth glowing orange. A woman bends over it, sliding a flat round of dough inside on a wooden paddle. You step closer and feel the heat radiating, making your skin prickle. The smell is intoxicating: flour, smoke, and the faint sweetness of barley. She pulls out a finished loaf, the crust unevenly browned, some spots nearly charred. You tear off a piece. It's chewy, smoky, with just enough grit from stone-ground flour to remind you you're not at a modern bakery. You smile faintly, whispering, rustic, let's call it. But bread wasn't the only thing born from these ovens. Another cook skewers cuts of goose and fish, balancing them awkwardly over the fire. The fat drips onto coals, sending up hissing smoke that stings your eyes. You bite into a piece of goose, and it's rich, flavorful, but unevenly cooked, one side crisp, the other chewy. Historians still argue whether these quirks were due to lack of technique or just the limitations of clay ovens. But either way, it made every meal an adventure. Quirky tidbit: some bread was baked with whole fish inside. Imagine cutting into a loaf only to find a fish staring back at you, scales and all. You chuckle softly, shaking your head, imagining a baker proudly presenting his surprise fish loaf to unimpressed children. Yet it happened, proof that Egyptians weren't afraid of culinary experiments. Nearby, a pot simmers slowly over coals. You peer inside and see lentils bubbling with garlic and coriander. The smell is earthy, comforting, less glamorous than roasted meat, but more dependable. You take a spoonful, thick, hearty, the kind of food that warms you from the inside. Around you, workers and children line up for bowls, dipping their bread in, scooping up the stew with their fingers. The act is messy but communal. Laughter bubbling alongside the stew. A man grinds spices with a stone mortar, coriander, cumin, fenugreek. The scent bursts into the air, sharp and grassy. He sprinkles it onto meat skewers before handing them to his neighbors. You take one bite in, and your tongue dances with flavor. Smoky, spicy, a little uneven, but alive. This isn't precision cooking. It's improvisation, trial and error, flavor pulled straight from earth and fire. You glance around and notice that every family cooks a little differently. Some prefer grilling, others roasting, others stewing. Some bread is flat, some thick. Some meats are tender, others tough. It's a patchwork of quirks, each bite telling a story of whoever stirred the pot or stoked the fire. And then there's the smoke. Oh, the smoke. Everything tastes of it: bread, meat, lentils, even your clothes. After standing here too long, you inhale deeply, letting it fill your lungs, and oddly, it becomes soothing. The smoke isn't a mistake, it's the flavor of home, of Egypt itself. Quirky detail: Egyptians sometimes burned incense while cooking, believing the aroma pleased the gods and flavored the food. Imagine sprinkling frankincense into your stew. You grin softly, muttering, Gordon Ramsay would lose his mind. Historians still argue whether incense truly flavored meals or was just ritual. But in this smoky kitchen, it feels inseparable. You sit cross-legged by the oven as another loaf is pulled out. This one's undercooked in the middle, doughy and sticky, but no one complains. Food wasn't about perfection. It was about sustenance, about togetherness. Children tear off chunks, giggling as steam curls up. A woman scolds them gently for burning their tongues, but her smile betrays her. The night deepens, and the firelight grows softer. The kitchen hums with quiet rhythm, crackling flames, bubbling pots, grinding mortar, voices humming low songs. You lean back against a warm wall, your stomach full of smoky bread and skewered meat. The air is heavy with spice, and your eyelids droop despite the noise. Historians still argue whether Egyptians were culinary innovators or simply pragmatic cooks, but lying here, half asleep, you know the answer doesn't matter. The quirks, uneven loaves, the smoky stew, the surprise fish bread are part of the charm. They remind you that food isn't always about perfection. It's about the warmth of fire, the laughter around it, the comfort of a full belly after a long day. You close your eyes, the smoke clinging to your skin, the taste of lentils lingering on your tongue, and as the ovens glow faintly in the dark, you drift deeper into slumber, rocked gently by the steady rhythm of Egypt's imperfect, delicious kitchens. The smoky kitchens fade, and when your eyes flutter open again, you're sitting by the riverbank under a pale dawn. The water ripples lazily, reflecting a sky streaked with rose and gold. Beside you, jars clink as men set them down in the grass. You lean closer, curious, and catch the unmistakable scent of alcohols, sweet, tangy, and a little sour. Welcome to the stranger side of Egypt's drink menu. One man cracks open a clay jar, and the smell bursts out, palm wine. You watch as he dips a ladle inside and pours the cloudy liquid into a cup. He hands it to you with a grin. You take a sip, and it's like being slapped with sweetness. The taste is syrupy, almost like fermented maple. But then a sour kick follows, leaving your tongue tingling. It's not refined, it's raw, sharp, unpredictable. You chuckle softly, whispering, "Definitely not a Chardonnay." Palm wine was tapped straight from date palms, the sap collected and left to ferment quickly under the desert sun. It spoiled fast, which meant drinking it fresh was the only option. You picture a group of villagers huddled together, rushing to finish a jar before it turned to vinegar, laughing at each other's sticky hands and flushed cheeks. Historians still argue whether palm wine was as common as beer or more of a regional specialty. But here, by the river, it feels essential, a sweet break from the monotony of barley brew. Another jar is pried open, this one filled with date beer. You brace yourself. The first sip is thick, gritty, almost chewy. It's less like drinking and more like spooning fermented porridge. But the flavor is strange in its appeal. Sweet dates dominate, but underneath lurks a sharp tempest of yeast and grain. You swallow slowly, trying to decide if you love it or hate it. The villagers around you laugh, as if your confusion is expected. Date beer wasn't meant to be fancy. It was meant to fill you up and knock you down gently. Quirky tidbit. Sometimes fruits or herbs were tossed into the brew almost by accident, and if the flavor wasn't terrible, the recipe stuck. Imagine discovering craft brews because someone tripped and spilled figs into a fermentation jar. You grin, picturing a brewer shrugging and saying, "Hey, it works." Historians still argue whether these experiments were deliberate or accidental, but either way, they gave Egypt a surprising range of drinks. As the jars pass from hand to hand, the atmosphere grows warm and giddy. Someone starts singing, his voice wobbling like a reed in the wind. Another claps along, sloshing wine over the rim of his cup. Children hover at the edges, giggling as they sneak sips of the watered-down versions. Their faces twist at the sourness, then break into laughter. You notice how quickly these drinks seem to knit people together. Strangers lean in closer, their words louder, their gestures broader. A man you've never seen before claps you on the back, handing you another cup as though your family. You drink, cough at the sourness, and he laughs until tears run down his cheeks. And of course, the gods had their place here too. Certain deities were associated with wine and intoxication, none more so than Hathor. Festivals in her honor sometimes devolved into drunken celebrations where jars of palm wine flowed until dawn. You imagine priests shaking their heads disapprovingly, only to sneak a cup themselves. The line between sacred and silly blurred quickly once the jars were open. You lean back on your elbows, staring at the river. The sky is brighter now, sunlight glittering across the ripples. The taste of palm wine lingers on your tongues, sweet, sharp, strangely alive. You close your eyes, breathing slowly, listening to the laughter around you. Quirky detail. Medical texts sometimes prescribed wine mixed with herbs for headaches, stomach aches, even toothaches. You smirk at the thought. Drink until you forget the pain. Historians still argue whether these remedies were genuinely effective or just liquid excuses. But the logic is familiar, even now. A bad day, a stiff drink, it's timeless. As the sun climbs higher, the jars grow lighter, the crowd quieter. Some men slump onto the grass, their arms crossed behind their heads, snoring softly. Others hum tuneless songs, swaying where they sit. The air smells faintly of sour fruit and damp clay, the last of the drinks seeping into the earth. You take one final sip, the sweetness cloying but oddly comforting. Your body feels warm, heavy, your eyelids drooping. The laughter softens into background noise, the clink of jars into faint lullabies. Historians still argue whether Egyptians were true connoisseurs of drink or simply opportunistic fermenters. But lying here, belly full of date beer and palm wine, you realize the truth doesn't matter. What matters is the ritual of sharing, the joy of a jar passed hand to hand, the comfort of knowing you'll never drink alone. You roll onto your side, the cool grass beneath your cheek, the taste of fermented dates still clinging to your lips. The river hums quietly beside you, its steady flow lulling you deeper. And as you drift off, you think with a smile, even in ancient Egypt, a good drink was never just about the drink, it was about the company, the laughter, the way it softened the edges of the day. The sour taste of palm wine fades from your tongue, and when your eyes open again, the scene before you is far quieter. The marketplace clamor and festival drums are gone, cats and the rustle of feathers. You've wandered into a courtyard where food isn't being served to humans, first teats being stolen, begged for, or shared with animals. Welcome to the strange, endearing world of pet snacks. A plump, striped cat sprawls lazily on the edge of a bread basket. Her tail flicks as she eyes a loaf cooling on a woven mat. The moment her human turns away, she pounces, sinks her teeth into the crust, and drags it halfway across the floor before being scolded. She drops it, licks her paw with exaggerated innocence, and you can't help but smirk. Tolerated, here they were beloved, practically worshipped, and they definitely took advantage of their divine reputation to swipe food whenever they pleased. You lean down and tear off a piece of bread, handing it to her. She accepts it, crunching with smug satisfaction, her golden eyes half closed in victory. Nearby, a monkey perches on a fence post, chattering loudly until someone tosses him a fig. He stuffs it into his mouth with both hands, cheeks bulging, juice dribbling down his chin. Another monkey screeches jealously, lunges forward, and grabs a date straight from a child's hand. The child yelps, then laughs, as though this chaos is normal. And perhaps it was. Monkeys were exotic pets for the wealthy, mischievous, and endlessly hungry. Their favorite trick, raiding baskets of fruit or swiping honey cakes cooling by the fire. Historians still argue whether they were kept purely as pets or also as status symbols. But their sticky fingerprints are all over Egypt's kitchens. You sit on a low stool with a honk that's more demand than request. It pecks at the vegetables until someone tosses it a slice. The goose devours it greedily, then stretches its neck to honk at another passerby. Cats were often mummified with bowls of milk and little offerings of food, as if even in the afterlife they'd demand midnight snacks. Imagine being buried with your cat and a snack stash just to keep her from haunting you. You grin faintly, the absurdity both funny and oddly touching. Historians still argue whether pets were truly companions or semi-sacred guardians, but their diets certainly looked suspiciously indulgent. A woman emerges from her house carrying a tray of leftover stew. Instead of scraping it into the dirt, she ladles it into shallow bowls for the dogs lying nearby. They lap it eagerly, tails wagging, slurping so loudly you laugh. In her voice, you watch one puppy clamber into the bowl, paws covered in stew, licking happily until its siblings shove it aside. You notice something else. Sometimes it was practicality. Cats guarded grain stores by hunting mice, dogs protected households, and even geese acted as noisy alarms. Feeding them meant keeping them loyal. Here's a fish, now chase those rats. Practical, but also strangely affectionate. And then there's the truly odd sight, a baboon chained near the temple steps, munching on a piece of bread slathered with honey. He eats messily, smearing it across his fur, while a priest tries in vain to keep him still. Baboons were sacred to Thoth, god of wisdom, but they were also notorious troublemakers. You grin, whispering, sacred or not, he's just here for the snacks. Quirky detail. Records suggest some wealthier households even let their pets share at the table. Cats lapping milk from bowls beside their owners. Dogs nibbling scraps of goose meat underfoot. You picture a noble banquet interrupted by a cat strutting across the table, tail high, swiping figs off golden plates. No one dares scold it tits. Sacred, after all. Historians still argue whether this was everyday reality or exaggerated tales, but you can almost hear the laughter when it happened. The courtyard fills with animal sounds, cats purring, dogs panting, monkeys screeching, geese honking. The chaos feels alive, oddly comforting. Food here isn't just for humans. It's part of a bigger circle, shared and stolen by creatures that lived alongside Egyptians. You bite into an imaginary fig, sweet and sticky, while a monkey eyes you jealously. You toss him the rest, and he scampers away triumphantly. As the sun dips lower, the courtyard softens into calm. Cats curl up, bellies full, their purrs rumbling like low drums. Dogs sprawl in the dust, paws twitching in dreams. Even the monkeys quiet, huddling together with sticky fingers. You sit among them, full and drowsy yourself, lulled by the gentle chorus of satisfied animals. Historians still argue whether feeding pets was luxury, necessity, or devotion. But sitting here, watching creatures drift into sleep with full bellies, you know the truth doesn't need categories. Sharing food, whether with children, gods, or animals, was simply part of life. You lean back against the wall, the faint taste of figs still clinging to your lips, the soft weight of a cat settling on your lap. She purrs steadily, her warmth spreading into your body, pulling you deeper into relaxation. Your eyes droop, the world blurs, and you drift further into the dream content. Like every creature around you, with a snack and a little company. The purring cat on your lap fades into silence, and when you open your eyes again, the courtyard is gone. Instead, you're seated in the shadow of a colossal temple wall, its surface carved with scenes of gods feasting, drinking, and laughing, as if eternity itself were a banquet. The air hums with whispers of stories, tales that shaped how Egyptians thought about food, not just as meals, but as myth. Tonight, you're invited to listen. A storyteller leans forward, eyes glinting in the torchlight. He begins with a tale of Ra, the sun god, who traveled across the sky each day. According to legend, he was sustained by offerings of bread and beer placed in his honor. Without them, his strength might waver, and the sun might falter. You chew on a crumb of bread, in your imagination, suddenly aware that even the simplest bite carried cosmic weight. Historians still argue whether these myths reflected actual belief or just symbolic reassurance. But for the listeners gathered here, each loaf mattered to the rhythm of the universe. The story shifts. You hear of Hathor, goddess of joy, who once became so enraged that she threatened to destroy humanity. The gods tricked her by dyeing beer red with pomegranate juice, making it look like blood. She drank it, became intoxicated, and fell asleep instead of rampaging. You sip an imaginary cup of that red beer's sweet tart, a little bitter, and smile softly. In this story, beer didn't just quench thirst, it saved humanity. Quirky tidbit. Some festivals reenacted this myth with actual vats of red beer. You chuckle under your breath, picturing revelers staggering around while insisting they were saving the world. Another tale drifts through the night. Osiris, god of the afterlife, was said to have taught humanity the art of agriculture, showing them how to grow barley and wheat. Every loaf of bread, every jug of beer was a reminder of his gift. Eating was not just survival, it was communion with Osiris himself. You picture a farmer biting into an onion after hours in the field, muttering thanks to Osiris between mouthfuls. Historians still argue whether these myths grew from actual practices or whether the practices grew from the myths, but the connection is undeniable. The storyteller grins and leans closer, voice dropping. He recounts how certain animals were sacred and thus taboo to Etabis for Thoth, cats for Bestet, but, of course, humans being humans, sometimes taboos were broken. Tales warned of curses for those who feasted on forbidden meat. You smirk faintly, whispering. So basically the world's earliest food allergies, sept divine instead of medical. Then comes a lighter fable. The goddess Isis, cunning and resourceful, was said to use honey to trick enemies or soothe the sick. One story describes her calming a crying child by dipping her finger in honey and touching it to his lips. You taste the sticky sweetness in your mind, thick and floral, and nod. Even divine mothers knew the power of sugar. Quirky detail: in some myths, gods themselves were imagined as feasting endlessly. Whole banquet scenes are carved on temple walls, with deities reclining at tables, groaning with bread, meat, beer, and cakes. You smile, realizing Egyptians projected their own love of snacks onto the heavens. If humans enjoyed honey cakes, surely the gods did too. Historians still argue whether these depictions were meant literally or symbolically, but either way, they show how inseparable food and faith were as the night deepens. The torchlight flickers, making the carved figures seem to move. You watch as Horus raises a cup, Hathor sways to music, and Osiris breaks bread. For a moment, the gods feel alive, dining beside you. The storyteller's voice grows softer, more hypnotic, as if the myths themselves are drifting into your dreams. He ends with a warning. Gluttony displeased the gods. To eat without offering, to hoard without sharing, was to invite disaster. Food was sacred, meant to be shared among family, community, and even gods. You lean back, the reminder echoing in your mind. Every bite was an act of balance, a negotiation. With both hunger and heaven, the torch gutters low, smoke curling into the air. The storyteller's voice fades into the hush of the night, leaving you with the faint taste of honey and beer still clinging to your tongue. You close your eyes, the images of divine banquets glowing behind your eyelid stables, laden with loaves, jars of beer overflowing, gods laughing as though eternity itself were one long dinner party. Historians still argue whether these myths shaped daily meals or whether meals shaped the myths. But lying here, drowsy, you know it doesn't matter. What matters is the comfort in believing your bread is blessed, your beer divine, your figs sacred. Food wasn't just what Egyptians ate, it was how they connected to gods, to each other, to the endless cycle of life and death. You sigh softly, the stone wall cool against your back, the night thick around you, and as your eyes close, you drift deeper, carried along by whispers of gods feasting forever in a banquet that never ends. The temple torches fade, the carved gods blur back into stone, and when you open your eyes, you're no longer in a place of myth. Instead, you're standing in a quiet field on the edge of the Nile at twilight. The world feels softer now, quieter, as if history itself is exhaling. The days, noises, markets, feasts, children, animals are gone. What remains are the fading echoes of meals, the last crumbs of memory dissolving into the evening air. This is the winding down, the gentle fade-out of Egypt's snacks and stories. You stroll slowly, your sandals brushing against reeds, the smell of the river still rich with mud and life. In your mind's mouth, you taste the remnants of it all, the gritty bread that once chipped teeth, the frothy beer that kept workers humming, the sticky honey that glued children's fingers together, the pungent garlic that fueled laborers, the sweet cakes shaped like lotus blossoms, the odd crunch of roasted locusts. Each flavor hovers like a ghost, not unpleasant, but faint like the aftertaste of a long banquet where you're finally too full to eat another bite. Nearby, a farmer tends a small fire, roasting onions over the coals. He peels back the charred skins and hands you one. You bite in, and it's soft, smoky, sweet, so different from the raw bite that once burned your tongue. The onion melts in your mouth like caramelized sugar. You smile softly, thinking even the simplest food can end with sweetness if given enough time. Historians still argue whether onions were primarily fuel or delicacy, but sitting here in the twilight, they feel like comfort. A family gathers by the riverbank, passing around bowls of lentil stew. The children are quiet now, eating slowly, dipping bread without giggling. Their parents talk in low voices, pointing at the stars, just beginning to prick the sky. You sip the stew they offer, earthy, warm, spiced faintly with coriander. It's not extravagant. It's not festival food or royal feasting. It's humble, steady, grounding. You realize that for every lavish banquet, there were countless evenings just like this. Families gathered around small fires, sharing simple food, ending the day together. Quirky tidbit. Archaeologists have found bite marks on loaves left in tombs, as if someone couldn't resist sneaking one last nibble before sealing eternity. You chuckle softly, imagining a worker muttering, "No one will notice," before chomping down. Historians still argue whether this was theft, ritual, or accident, but it makes you grin to think of ancient midnight snacking carved into history itself. The air grows cooler, a breeze rippling across the water. You hear frogs begin their chorus, cicadas buzzing faintly. The sounds merge into a lullaby of the Nile, soothing and steady. You lean back against a tree, your belly warm from stew, your eyelids heavy. Around you, the world is slipping into quiet. You think of everything you've tasted: tonight bread, beer, honey, goose, onions, garlic, figs, locusts, fish loaves, date wine, sesame seeds. Some flavors were delicious, others bizarre, but all of them stitched together a picture of life along this river. Egyptians ate to live, yes, but they also ate to worship, to celebrate, to heal, to protect, to remember. Every bite was layered with meaning, every snack a story. Historians still argue about details: how often, how widely, how truly these foods were enjoyed, but the arguments themselves feel irrelevant here. The people are gone, the fires are ashes, the jars are dust. Yet the memory of their meals lingers, and maybe that's enough. Food doesn't need to survive physically to survive in spirit. You sigh deeply, feeling your body heavy, your breath slow. The last flavors soften in your mind: honey fading into sweetness, bread fading into smoke, beer fading into froth. It all blurs into calm, as though Egypt's kitchen has finally closed for the night. And now, let's gently slip into the wind down.